Thank you for joining and welcome to another consultation and discussion for the Sexual Exploitation, Abuse and Harassment, or SEAH study related to the Safeguards Policy Statement by the Asian Development Bank. This consultation forms part of the stakeholder engagement that supports the Safeguard Policy Review and Update process, or the SPRU, as you may hear us refer to it as. My name is Azim Manji. I am your consultation moderator for this session. This is our 15th thematic consultation topic so far, and this is the final in a series of 3 regional consultations and discussions on sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment. In today's consultation, we're joined by Bruce Dunn, a director with the Sustainable Development and Climate Change Department in the ADB, and also by Samantha Hung, Chief of the Gender Equality Thematic Group in the ADB. We're also joined by Malika Shagazatova, a Social Development Specialist on Gender and Development within the ADB, as well as our moderator for the Q&A session, Dr. Zainab El-Bakri. Other experts will be on hand for the Q&A session from the Sustainable Development and Climate Change Department at the ADB, and I know they all look forward to engaging with you for the discussions as well as responding to feedback. As I mentioned, this is our final interactive session on the issue of sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment, and it builds on the previous sessions on gender that we had last week. Today, we have representation mostly from North America and Europe, including the United Kingdom. Most of our participants here today are a mix from government as well as civil society and NGOs, as well as academia and the private sector. Nearly 90% of you are from outside the ADB network, which is wonderful to see, and I hope this means we have a diverse and animated discussion on the issues to be presented today. A note that we will be extensive with our use of SEAH as an acronym in English for sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment, and GBV as an acronym in English for gender-based violence. We ask participants to take note particularly of these acronyms. In this consultation, Samantha Hung and Malika Shagazatova will jointly present the main summary issues related to the study they have prepared on sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment, and the relationship of this to the gender study presented last week, as they both pertain to the Safeguards Policy Update. From the presentations, we're hoping that participants like you will share insights on the potential gaps of the provisions and implementation of the previous policy, or the one that currently stands at least, and propose recommendations to ensure the strengthening of the forthcoming policy. Comments received from this consultation and thereafter will inform the revision of ADB's Safeguards policy. Before I call upon our speakers, here's a few gentle meeting reminders. As all stakeholders and participants have consented when joining, the ADB is recording this session for the purposes of preparing a summary of the meeting. It's the intention that these recordings will be available to ADB staff and consultants, and then more broadly to all members of this consultation publicly. If you have any concerns about this, please contact the Secretariat at the email address posted in the chat box. Please join from a quiet, distraction-free area, and please ensure that your microphone is off when you're not speaking. During the Q&A session, you may ask questions by typing them into the chat box or raising your hand. You will then be asked by Dr. Zainab El-Bakri to unmute your microphone and turn on your camera so that you can ask your question live. As we're all colleagues each other, please be respectful to each other's point of view and the individuals as well. Dr. El-Bakri and I will manage time to ensure that we maintain the schedule. IT support is provided throughout this consultation, and you may ask for the support by typing your issue or query into the chat box in the languages which is only English that we're using today. As we're all joining by Zoom, here's a few guidance notes when using the important Zoom buttons. We ask that you use your proper name in Zoom for our documentation. To change your name on Zoom, click on the Participants button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Then on the right-hand side of your screen, look for your own name. When you found your name, click on the More button on the right-hand side of your name, then click on the Rename button. After you've clicked on the Rename button, you can type in the name that you wish to appear on screen, the agency you represent, and then click OK. If you wish to send a message, question, or share feedback, click on the Chat button. If you wish to comment or raise a question live in the language you prefer, click on the smile icon or the reactions button, and then click on the raise hand emoji. To speak, unmute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon, and then to show your video, if you prefer, you can click on the video icon. The next set of slides shows how we value diverse and informed feedback from a wide range of stakeholders. So let me refer you to the slides and propose that you read them during your own time. I'm not going to go through each slide, but just want to remind you that these sessions are being recorded and will be documented and subsequently distributed during and for each event. This allows the ADB to review, consider, and respond to, if necessary, any comments and inputs made. If you wish to opt out of the recording and/or distribution of the recordings, please contact the Secretariat through the email address at the bottom of the screen or that appears in the chat box. If you have any concerns or issues on recording, confidentiality, potential risks, abuse, or any other kind of discrimination during the course of these consultations, please get in touch with the Secretariat through the email address that's at the bottom of the slide or in the chat box. In this consultation, we have about 2 hours, and here's what we have planned to maximize both your time as well as ours. Firstly, Mr. Bruce Dunn will provide welcome remarks and provide a context for this SEAH study. Mr. Dunn is a director of the Safeguards Division in ADB's Sustainable Development and Climate Change Department. Second, Samantha Hung will provide an overview of how specifically the SEAH issues relate to the gender work and policy imperatives being implemented by the ADB. This will frame the discussion on SEAH specifically and allow us to engage on issues of how SEAH can be considered in the forthcoming Safeguards Policy Review and Update. Samantha is Chief of the Gender Equality Thematic Group in the Sustainable Development and Climate Change Department at the ADB. Thirdly, we will follow on from Samantha's presentation with the presentation by Malika Shagozatova. Malika is a Social Development Specialist on Gender and Development in the ADB. And Malika will detail some of the SEAH study findings and key issues, including a comparator analysis and some of the performance standards and requirements, and how these relate to the revision of the current safeguards policy and might be considered and adopted in the revised policy. After the presentations by Bruce, Samantha, and Malika, we will take a brief 5-minute break where I will ask you to think about how this particular consultation went and opportunities for improving them in future presentations and consultations through some links that we will offer you. And you can put in your comments and feedback and provide us advice on how the consultations and our engagement with you might be improved. Finally, when we return from the break and as a culmination of the previous presentations, we have an open discussion on the SEAH issues raised in the presentations, as well as, for those of you that have received it, the study summary paper, which was emailed to all pre-registered participants and is currently available as a download from the ADB websites, including the Safeguard Policy Update website. This will be facilitated and moderated by Zainab El-Bakri. Zainab is a senior consultant on gender and safeguards in the ADB's Sustainable Development and Climate Change Department. A reminder that you may ask your questions live or through the chat box or through raising your hand virtually, as previously explained using the Zoom functions. Zainab will prompt us with some guide questions that will remain on the screen during our break, and this will help us to frame our conversations for the discussions that we will have. Please then join us, as I mentioned, for some quick event evaluations before we turn you back to Bruce Dunn of the ADB to give us a wrap-up and indicative next steps following this consultation. It's now my pleasure to turn it over to Director Mr. Bruce Dunn for his welcome remarks and offer a contextual overview of the SEAH study. Bruce?
Great, thank you, Azim. And good day, everyone. Welcome. Really pleased that you could join us today for this regional consultation topic on sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment. This is being undertaken in the context of the update of ADB's 2009 Safeguard Policy Statement. Pleased actually to see that many of you are joining these consultations for the second time or the third time. Many of you have actually joined previous sessions. In fact, we have a fairly small group today, So I think, given most of you have been in previous sessions, I won't spend time now to go through a lot of the background context for the policy update. Just a couple of key points though. We are undertaking this regional consultation series on a whole range of topics. As Azim has mentioned, this is actually the 14th topic I think that we've held so far. And we're in the process of doing a series of consultations on gender and gender-related issues. We started last week with a broader look at gender and safeguards. This week, we're looking at sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment. And then next week, we'll have a couple of sessions where we'll be looking at sexual orientation and gender identity. And this is all part of a process for us to really look at how we can strengthen the existing safeguard policy statement, not just in some of the traditional core areas for safeguards of environment or looking at, say, involuntary resettlement, which have always been the core of our safeguard policy, but really a lot of cross-cutting dimensions that we really need to strengthen both at the policy level as well as on the implementation side. Now, looking at today's session, of course, we're going to be delving into the SEAH issues, and this is obviously a key priority. It's been getting a lot of global attention in the last few years, and quite rightly so. It's an issue that ADB, along with other international financial institutions, has made commitments around addressing. Initially, the joint commitment that was made in 2018 by the heads of MDBs in terms of addressing SEAH risks in our own organisations, with our staff, but also in terms of our operations, and that sort of transcends into the projects that we finance and the support that we provide to our developing member countries. It is not, however, explicitly included in our existing safeguard policy statement. Now, that goes back to 2009, it's more than a decade old, and the evaluation study that was undertaken on that policy, that was completed in 2020, amongst other things, it did highlight that SEAH was a gap. It was one area that was not explicitly mentioned and that should be addressed. And that's something that we're now looking at very carefully to see how we can go about that. Now, in the meantime, the Gender Equality Thematic Group at ADB have already been taking steps to look at how we can address SEAH in our operations. There's been a lot of internal work and discussions, and a good practice guidance note has actually been developed and discussed fairly extensively inside ADB, and we're now in a process of just starting to pilot that. That has been an important process to look at, of course, the issues and how we should address them in ADB operations, but the piloting process will also allow us to get some practical experience that can then feed over into the safeguards and the implementation for the new policy. So that's something that we can build on. But now in the context of the policy update, we're also looking very carefully at how other institutions have been addressing this in their own policy frameworks. As you'll see today, there is a benchmarking study. This is something we've been doing consistently for a range of safeguard issues, and today we'll be presenting to you the findings of the work that we've done. We've been looking at what's in the policy frameworks as well as other guidance and implementation experience. This is something, of course, we're very keen to be able to, of course, at least harmonise, upward harmonisation with other institutions, and also consider through these consultations, getting your feedback in terms of really how we can have a robust policy and good implementation moving forward. So we really value your participation today. We're looking forward to a good discussion. We're very open. We're here to listen, and very much welcome your comments, your questions, and your recommendations. Now, with that, it's my pleasure to turn over to firstly Samantha Hung. She is the Chief of ADB's Gender Equality Thematic Group, and she'll kick off with the first presentation, which will discuss the broader approach inside ADB. Before then, Malika Shagatsova, who's also from ADB's gender thematic group, she will present further details on the study. And then, of course, later we'll have more discussion. So thank you once again for joining, and look forward to having discussions later on. I'll hand over now to you, Sam.
Thank you very much, Bruce, and good, I think it might be morning for many people on the call, or afternoon. It's a pleasure to be with you here today. And as Bruce said, it is a relatively smaller group, but we hope that that will be conducive to some interesting and in-depth dialogue with all of you. And we really look forward to hearing your views. So as Bruce mentioned, last week we had 5 broad consultations on a broader topic of gender and safeguards. But today we're zooming on in a particular issue relating to sexual exploitation, abuse and harassment, or SEAH. And I'm glad that we don't have translation on the call today, so I will be using SEAH as an acronym to make it shorter throughout the presentation. So many of you on the call will be aware that broadly, ADB has a very high level commitment to supporting the acceleration of gender equality. And it is actually one of our 7 operational priorities at corporate level. So within that operational priority, we do place importance on addressing gender-based violence broadly. And we have also recognized the need to address project risks of SEAH. But as Bruce mentioned, it's not, SEAH is a relatively new area for ADB in terms of addressing the risks, and it in a way cuts across gender and safeguards. And that's why at this stage, we're having this specific consultation to discuss how we can take this forward in the context of the safeguards policy update. So if I could please just move to the next slide and really talk you through the background institutional commitments that ADB, along with other multilateral development banks, have made with respect to SEAH specifically. So back in April 2018, at a Heads of Multilateral Development Banks, or MDB meeting, all the presidents, so that of ADB and 9 other MDBs, confirmed their commitment to prevent sexual exploitation, abuse and harassment, SEAH, within their institutions and also across their operations. So this was jointly reaffirmed a few months later in October 2018 at the first Global Safeguarding Summit in London, which was hosted by the UK government and at the time the Department for International Development, or DFID, now known as FCDO, part of the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. So this shared MDB commitment at the highest level of our leadership was really to ensure the creation of an environment in which SEAH is not only rejected, but active steps are taken to address the challenges faced by multilateral development banks in this regard. And the undertaking was to maintain and advance standards to prevent SEAH through 7 common shared principles. So I'll just walk you through those 7. So firstly, to foster a culture of respect and high standards of ethical behavior across institutions. Secondly, to establish and maintain standards aimed at preventing SEAH and other forms of misconduct. Thirdly, to provide a safe and trusted environment for those affected by SEAH to step forward to report incidents and concerns. Fourthly, to provide protection for those that may be affected, as well as whistleblowers or witnesses within their institutions, and to take appropriate measures against any form of retaliation that may occur. Fifthly, to maintain robust policy frameworks and clear institutional mechanisms that address how incidents and allegations will be handled. Sixthly, to provide effective training programs so that all staff understand the requirements and standards of behavior. And seventh and last, to support clients to develop and implement policies and mechanisms that address SEAH. So as part of this shared commitment, ADB, alongside other MDBs, contributes to periodic joint reporting. And this is coordinated amongst the MDBs. And the latest joint report update was submitted last September, so about 7 months ago now. So importantly, this joint MDB commitment and work in strengthening both institutional and operational approaches has led to deepened engagement, knowledge sharing, and collaboration amongst MDBs in this space. And in November 2020, a dedicated MDB SEAH working group was formed, and Malika, my colleague, and I are part of this active working group. And the purpose was really to collaborate and coordinate between institutions whose policies and procedures at that time, and even now, somewhat differ in their approach and coverage. So the MDB working group really focuses on a development of knowledge sharing through common platform and opportunities for joint pilot initiatives. And secondly, country level collaboration around specific investments. And so the intent really is to facilitate communication and support sharing of practical tools and training, and really for that to play out at country level so that we work towards country collaboration to identify and explore scope for piloting harmonized approaches through jointly developed practical interventions. If I could please move to the next slide. So Bruce earlier talked about the 2009 Independent Evaluation Department report findings about our safeguards policy statement. And that report importantly recognized that there was a lack of specific support on emerging important issues such as SEAH and how they related to the worksite and broader project impacts on communities. And the report further noted that safeguarding against SEAH cuts across environmental safeguards, health and safety, gender, social protection, and therefore may require an integrated approach and analysis by safeguards and gender team members to enhance synergies and reduce duplication. The report further stressed the importance of provision of sufficient operational guidance, given that this is a relatively new area, through the operation manual, good practice notes, and training for ADB staff and our partners. So in responding to this Independent Evaluation Department report, our management recognized that there are some real gaps in areas such as SEAH, and that these really did need to be addressed. It was further noted that in the interim, it would be important to develop guidance on these areas prior to the update of the safeguards policy statement, because there would be this interim period of time. ADB further recognizes that channeling and handling of SEAH concerns and response through existing grievance redress mechanisms under existing safeguards policy requirements may not be appropriate for handling SEAH due to the sensitivity and confidentiality requirements associated with SEAH cases. So it was really in this context and based on this high-level commitment and this independent review that we developed this benchmarking exercise for SEAH in the context of safeguards in order to compare ADB's existing policies and practices with that of our peer MDBs and other IFIs. Next slide, please. So, as I mentioned, the main purpose of this benchmarking is to compare where we stand in terms of our current policies, strategies, and practices on SEAH with those used by our peer multilateral development banks. And so the study therefore involved identifying gaps, strengths, and weaknesses, as well as good practices, lessons learned, and emerging issues, and how these issues play out relatively across different MDBs. And in doing so, it identified operational implications for ADB to deepen our work on SEAH. The study was undertaken largely as a desktop exercise and involved the review of key ADB, different MDB, and third-party documentation, as well as other resources, including from United Nations agencies, non-governmental organizations, and research and academic studies. The desk review was supplemented by virtual interviews with ADB staff and representative staff of peer MDBs. And of course, the study will be further supplemented through additional consultations with our developing member countries, civil society, and other stakeholders. And this session today is one of these opportunities to further consult. So with that background, I'd like to hand over to Malika from my team who will talk us through the study's key findings and issues. Thank you. Over to you, Malika.
Thank you, Sam, and good morning, good afternoon to all participants of this consultation session. I will present the key findings of the benchmarking study, and as my colleagues, I also look forward to the discussion and engagement today. We hope you can share your reactions to what we are presenting and views on the proposed approaches. For this study, first we looked at how SEAH is included in the current ADB policy principles and practices. And under Safeguard Policy Statement that was approved in 2009, safeguards are understood as seeking to avoid, minimize, or mitigate adverse environmental and social impacts, including protecting the rights of those who are likely to be affected or marginalized by a development process. In environmental safeguards requirement, ADB sets out our commitment to occupational and community health and safety. And while SPS notes potential gender-related risks, it does not specifically refer to gender-based violence, GBV, or SEAH. We also have gender and development policy, which describes our institutional vision to do good. And this is done through investing in gender equality more widely and addressing female-focused violence more specifically. The initial poverty and social assessment, or IPSA, and relevant operational manuals broadly address adverse social and gender risks and require ensuring that project designs maximize social benefits and avoid or minimize social risks, particularly for vulnerable groups and marginalized groups, as well as it requires to specifically address risks of human trafficking. Other relevant ADB strategies, such as social protection strategy, also indirectly addresses many risk factors, including poverty, disability, unemployment, which makes some groups more vulnerable to SEAH. ADB's Corporate Strategy 2030 that was approved in 2018 prioritized accelerating gender equality as one of 7 key operational priorities. And it further acknowledges that achieving gender equality is a necessary enabler for other strategic objectives of our organization. An operational plan for operational priority 2 on accelerating progress in gender equality specifically calls for assessing project risks of sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment, and human trafficking in the context of measures for eliminating gender-based violence. As Sam mentioned in management response to independent evaluation department's report, ADB recognized that there are some real gaps related to the risk on gender-based violence and sexual violence, and this needs to be addressed. But it also mentioned that it also noted the importance of being mindful to make a distinction between compliance requirements and aspirational goals. It is also noted the value of developing interim guidance notes, as Sam mentioned, on these areas prior to SPS update. Let me now move to the key study findings. Thank you. So the MTPs that we covered by comparative study include Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the Inter-American Development Bank, International Finance Corporation, and the World Bank. We specifically looked at how SEAH-related provisions included in safeguards policies and standards. We looked at what was the use of SEAH risk assessment, what materials are available for implementation support, and what are specific requirements related to SEAH included in procurement procedures. The key aspects that were covered in this study included the scope and application of respective peer multilateral development bank safeguard systems with respect to the risks of SEAH, including relevant operational requirements that are applicable to banks, to borrowers, to executive and implementing agencies, contractors, and clients. Next slide, please. Thank you. MDBs are using different approaches to tackle SEAH in their operations. Some MDBs have incorporated explicit provisions in their safeguard standards, both as standalone or across relevant standards. Others have developed tools, procedures, recommendations through adoption of good practice notes, and these are used during the project design and implementation. And amongst the MDBs, Inter-American Development Bank has the most extensive gender-based violence and SEAH-related provisions. It requires the borrowers to address gender-related risks, including gender-based exclusion, sexual violence, gender-based violence, sexual exploitation, and human trafficking. The European Bank for Reconstruction and Development has an overall commitment to prevent and address any form of violence and harassment. And the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, in the recently approved Environment and Social Framework, that it was approved in 2021, included an elevated importance of gender equality and commitment to addressing gender-based violence. The World Bank and International Finance Corporation safeguards policies do not specifically refer to GBV or SEAH, but they use other operational tools, which I'll discuss in the next slide. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we've been looking at what are the SEAH-specific provisions included in performance standards and requirements. Again, Inter-American Development Bank has the most comprehensive coverage with explicit mention of SEAH-related considerations across various standards, in addition to standalone gender standards. Requirements include risk assessment. There are explicit requirements for contractor sexual harassment policies and code of conduct. The requirements to support sensitization of workers and communities, and establishment of grievance redress mechanism. In EBRD, SEAH is included across 2 performance requirements, PR2 on labor and working condition, and PR4 on health, safety, and security. And in Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, gender-based violence and SEAH-related requirements are included in the ESS, Environment and Social Standard 1, which is Environment and Social Assessment and Management. And this includes requirements for managing risks of project-related gender-based violence to project-affected persons and communities, as well as project workers. Next slide, please. So the third area is we've been looking what are the guidance materials available for staff, executive, and implementing agencies for, to ensure that the implementation support is provided. As I mentioned earlier, the World Bank does not specifically refer to GBV or SEAH, although identification of gender impacts is required. And at the same time, the World Bank has well-developed operational tools for identification of SEAH-related risks. And the bank issued a good practice note on addressing SEAH in projects with large infrastructure works. It was first published in 2018, and then it was updated in 2020. The World Bank requires use of project risk screening tools, to identify the level of SEAH risk, and to include appropriate and proportionate mitigation measures. And this need to take into account both rating from the tool, but also need to be informed by inputs from community consultations as part of the environmental social assessment. The World Bank has further strengthened contractors' accountability mechanisms through procurement, through enhanced procurement requirements. And it continues supporting and guiding borrowers in the assessment of bidders' responsiveness, their competence to comply with the specific SEAH-related obligations. So they're supporting executive and implementing agency staff during a bid evaluation process. Attention to SEAH is incorporated into the World Bank throughout the full World Bank project cycle. It's starting with the use of SEAH risk assessment tool. There are specific requirements for stakeholder engagement, requirements for code of conduct, and SEAH-specific requirements in procurement. and of course, reporting and grievance redress mechanism. So the European EBRD, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, also applies risk screening tools to determine the level of SEAH risks that are specific to projects. It requires also including appropriate and proportionate mitigation measures. Both EBRD and IFC jointly developed and published practical guidance for private sector operations. This guidance note is titled Addressing Gender-Based Violence and Harassment, Emerging Good Practices for the Private Sector, which provide very specific guidance for private sector clients. Next slide, please. So this slide provides a high-level comparative summary of findings of approaches used by different multilateral development banks and some donors funds and how they address SEAH. And it shows that although different institutions have slightly varied approaches on how they're dealing, preventing, mitigating, and responding to SEAH, addressing SEAH is increasingly on the agenda of all these organizations. Next slide. So just a summary of key study findings. The study found that overall, ADB is potentially at risk of falling behind other peer MDBs in terms of existence of established approaches to address gender-based violence and sexual violence as a compliance measure. At this point in time, we do not have systems in place which are designed to specifically identify, mitigate, and respond to project-related risks of SEAH, including both worker-to-worker and worker-to-community impacts. SEAH-related risks are also not explicitly identified in the current SPS as consideration in project screening and categorization system. In addition, as SEAH mentioned, it is also one of the findings of the independent evaluation department report that if there will be any SEAH-related incidents, this would currently be handled through the existing complaints reporting and redress mechanisms that are not specifically designed for this purpose, with due considerations to sensitivity, confidentiality, and survivor-centered approach, which are very important, as part of the good practice in handling SEAH allegations and cases. Furthermore, absence of common MDB good practice standards and requirements for addressing SEAH can create some challenges for co-financing, and also may result in greater transaction costs for borrowers. Consistent approaches and requirements in procurement, reporting, and service provisions would make it easier for MDBs to collaborate on country level when we are designing and implementing our project, but it will also increase efficiency and coherence. Next slide, please. I would like to also discuss some of the proposed approaches on how we are thinking we can address the lack of guidance related to GBV and current policy provisions. We are currently finalizing a good practice note on addressing SEAH in ADB finance project with civil works. This good practice note is developed with the intent to support ADB staff, our borrowers, our executive and implementing agency staff and contractors in designing and implementing measures to address SEAH in ADB finance operations. This good practice note is not ADB policy. The recommendation that it will be providing are advisory in nature. And it is proposed that application of recommendations in this good practice note will be piloted in selected developing member countries, in 5 selected developing member countries, and it will be applied to new projects with infrastructure development components and civil works. So this good practice note is designed based on 7 guiding principles, which are in line with international good practice. I will only highlight today 3 of them. Firstly, the principle of shared responsibility. It should be understood by all players and stakeholders that actions against SEAH require collaboration and commitment among ADB staff, our consultants, contractors, borrowers, and staff of executive and implementing agencies. Secondly, the survivor-centered approach. This is a core principle that requires to always prioritize the needs and rights of SEAH survivors. And thirdly, the principle of proportionate action. This meaning that measures to tackle SEAH should be proportionate to project-related risks, existing country SEAH frameworks, and the level of their enforcement and implementation, and policies and practices that are in place in our executive and implementing agencies. So the good practice note outlines responsibilities for incorporating, implementing, and monitoring and reporting of SEAH-related measures. And it provides a guidance set of tools, checklists, templates, and minimum good practice standards that can be used by our counterpart staff in executive and implementing agencies and by contractors to develop effective approaches and establish systems to tackle SEAH during the project design and implementation. Next slide, please. So this is the last slide of my presentation. And here I would like to present some key issues that need to be further considered and discussed. The benchmarking exercise highlighted several gaps in ADB policies, practices, and resources when we compare our approaches to those that are used by peer MDBs. So these 6 issues are proposed for further consideration. First is the integration of SEAH in project risk classification system. We believe that consideration should be given to an integrated project risk classification system approach. The integrated environmental and social impact assessment need to be used to avoid a siloed approach. Incorporation of contextual risks in project risk categorization related to SEAH should take into account country and project specific factors, such as prevalence of gender-based violence, violence against women, and sexual violence, existing country level legal frameworks, and the implementation, gender norms that might normalize gender-based violence and violence against women. The project-specific factors that need to be also taken into account should include risks that are associated with size of labor influx, project categorization, resettlement, indigenous people and environment, use of military or private security forces, and of course, operations in fragile, conflict-affected, and small island context. All these factors may interfere and amplify risks of gender-based and sexual violence, and use of risk-based approach would require development of corresponding risk assessment tools to inform proportionate approaches to address SEAH. The next area for further discussion is how we can consider SEAH as a cross-cutting issue in at least 2 standards. One is a standard for community and occupational health and safety, and another one is labor and working condition to cover nexus of worker-to-worker relationships and worker-to-community impact. And to cover SEAH risks, this issue would require more detailed discussion on specific provisions and requirements for safeguarding against SEAH, and what will be the specific requirements included in each of these standards. It would be also important during the next steps. It will be also important to see what is the implementation experience and lessons learned from comparator MDBs, more detailed discussion with our partners in executive and implementing agencies to see what are the challenges and opportunities we need to keep in mind. We also need to include more customized grievance redress mechanisms in the stakeholder engagement and disclosure policy standard. And this should be proportionate as part of the proportionate measure to respond to potential SEAH risk and impact of projects. It should be customized in a culturally appropriate way for different types of affected people, including survivors of SEAH. But it's also important to keep in mind that use of traditional dispute resolution methods for SEAH cases are strongly discouraged. It will be also important to understand that to understand and recognize that that there will be additional due diligence requirements, and this may emerge due to deeper coverage that will be mandated through the performance standard approach, and technical and financial resources may be required to cover and expand the thematic safeguards as a cross-cutting issues of gender-based violence and SEAH in labor and working conditions and community health and safety. As ADB adopts a new model, there may be risks to project processing time increasing if additional resources are not invested in the design, monitoring, and supervision of project safeguards, as well as if associated capacity building is not implemented properly. So to address this, we are proposing that there is a need for transition period for at least 1 year before the policy effectiveness. The next area is guidance and tools. And this is very much in line with MDB experiences in introducing SEAH safeguarding measures. And it is recommended that in parallel to the ongoing work on review and update of SPS, which is ongoing, and we already have a timeline, ADB can pilot a good practice note on addressing SEAH and ADB finance projects with civil works, because the pilot will allow us to try out operational approaches in addressing SEAH, as well as we'll use this time to build capacity of stakeholders, borrowers, executive and implementing agencies, but also ADB staff. The good practice note can then be updated following the pilot results to reflect lessons learned and also according to emerging good practices from other MDBs. It is also recommended to develop other toolkits, and one of them is we will need to have a toolkit that will be providing further guidance to our executive and implementing agency staff and contractors on establishing grievance redress mechanism, which is specifically tailored for SEAH, and how the case handling using the survivor-centered approach need to be implemented. It will be important to have resources and commitment to strengthen expertise on SEAH through addressing gaps in staffing and ensuring access to specialized training programs within ADB and with our DMC partner organizations. We are suggesting that a partnership with peer MDBs on safeguard training and capacity building for DMCs can be useful, and it can assist in building capacity of country-level stakeholders. We can also replicate past collaboration in establishing safeguards learning centers in selected DMCs. And last but not least, I already touched upon it, an increase in technical assistance resources to support expanded SEAH-related project safeguards, due diligence process, and borrowers' capacity may also be required. So we need to do further assessment of these issues, including costs implication, and this will be done. This will be undertaken through the next stages of the SPS update process. And in the meantime, we will provide additional technical and financial resources to support the rollout of the pilot. With this, I'm wrapping up. Thank you very much. Looking forward to this discussion, questions, and engagement on the proposed approach. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Malika, and thank you to all three of our presenters, Samantha Hung and Malika Shagozatova, for your very comprehensive and detailed presentations, and for the overviews on the sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment and GBV studies that you have raised for all of us to consider. These presentations offer us clarity and present us some of the unique challenges that have been raised by the ADB's IED publicly, and the need for them to be considered in the revision of the safeguards policy by around March of 2023. The comparative analysis on SEAH presented by Malika will indeed need to be considered in how the ADB becomes a leader in incorporating sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment, as well as gender-based violence issues in the revised safeguards policy. We hope that we can get into some of the feedback and an opportunity to delve deeper into some of these issues during the forthcoming discussions arising from this Q&A session and the presentations that were given as a context and background. Before we move to that, I'd like to thank Director Bruce Dunn for also framing and contextualizing this discussion. For the Q&A session, we have about 70 to 75 minutes, and there's some flexibility in that. And just a note that should you wish to raise a question or share an experience anonymously, please send the message in the chat box, but instead of selecting to everyone in the chat, just send the message to either Jennifer de Belen or Niel Aquino, who are members of our team working behind the scenes, and they will repost your question under their names to protect your identity and offer you anonymity. Let's now then pause for a 5-minute break before we get to the Q&A. Before we do, can I please invite you to think about our poll evaluations that we will have a bit later on. And we want you to register your written feedback on how we can possibly improve the consultation and engagement approaches that we're employing now. There's 2 links that you will see on the chat box. One is to menti.com and the other is for our own internal post-evaluation questionnaire. Both ask questions related to the effectiveness, the efficiency, and the way we consult. And if you have opportunities or feedback for us to improve the way we consult, we really want to hear from you through a number of sentences, a few paragraphs if you wish. There's no limit in length to how much you can write. So please feel free to be as detailed as you want to be. And then we're going to have a quick Zoom poll as well. But that will be after the break. So right now, the next slide will show you the guide questions that we will have running during the break. And at the top right-hand side of the guide question slide, you will see a 5-minute timer. That's a countdown timer. And as that approaches 0, you'll know to return to your screens. We will also have some background music playing. So for those of you that have stepped away from your screens, you'll know that as the music begins to fade, it's time to return to the screen. So with that, we'll leave you for 5 minutes. And when we return, we will resume with a Q&A session facilitated by Zainab El-Bakri. See you in 5 minutes, everybody. Thank you very much and welcome back. We will now have the Q&A discussion as facilitated by Zainab El Bakri, a consultant to the ADB. You will see some guide questions flashed on the screen, which we've also had during our break. But please feel free to also share your experiences on how the ADB can better target or improve SEAH and GBV issues in the revision of the 2009 Safeguards Policy Statement as aligned to ADB Strategy 2030 and the OP2, which Samantha and Malika mentioned. And a reminder that you can ask questions through posting them in the chat box or through virtually raising your hand in the Zoom feature. And a further reminder that should you wish to raise your question or share an experience anonymously, to send that message in the chat box, but instead of selecting to everyone in the chat, please select sending the message to either Jennifer DeBellin or Niall Aquino. These are members of our team working behind the scenes, and they can then repost your question under their own names to protect your identity and offer you anonymity. Please then join us for a quick event evaluation before we turn you back to Bruce Dunn to give us a wrap up and the next steps following this consultation. So with that, let me please turn it over to Zainab El Bakri.
Thanks, Azim. Welcome, everybody. And can we see the questions that were just there right now? Yeah, so these are just some guiding questions for people to consider, but of course we are open to any other questions that you might want to raise. So maybe we had already received two comments, one from Coco Lamers from the Bank Information Center, and the other one from, sorry, let me, from Dr. Schaefer-Pruss of UN Women. So maybe I'll start with Dr. Schaefer. Do you want to come in and make any additional comments at this point?
Yes, thank you very much. I'm happy to do so. Good morning, good afternoon to all of you. Thanks first for this very interesting update and what you have been doing in order to present to us your work so far. But you see, as I have been many, many years ago, also with the Inter-American Development Bank, I know that SEAH was an issue for them for many years. So they have really built up quite a lot of experience. And I really wonder whether you could not get more from their best practices and from the way they have been introducing SEAH issues into their operational guidelines and also for the institutional work in order to speed up your work, because I think it's quite cumbersome, the process and the steps you have described to us, and I'm afraid you won't be able to really do it all in a year unless you can have some very solid guidelines on which you can work, just as a very practical issue. Otherwise, I would really strongly recommend to you to engage in close contacts with UN Women New York headquarters. I do know that UN Women headquarters, and as I'm with the NGO, the National Committee UN Women Germany, they are either about to enter into a memorandum of understanding with the World Bank and how to cooperate more closely and to get experience and also some support from the UN Women staff and how to better introduce gender-based violence and SEAH issues into their work. Whether it would not be a possibility that also ADB joins in a closer cooperation with UN Women to compare notes and to learn from what their experience is all over the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Schaefer. Can we move now to the comment from Coco from the Bank Information Center? I don't know who will speak on their behalf. Coco, are you there?
I am. Can you see me and hear me?
Yes. Hi,
Yes, I
nice to
am.
see you.
Nice to
Hi.
see you as well. Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks for this consultation. Yeah, but namely, first off, thank you all for the summary of the GBV SEAH review and today's consultation. My comment really was around, child SEAH, specifically that, we noted that the review didn't seem to distinguish between age groups or note specific risks of child SEAH. Given what we know to be the high risks of SEAH specifically on children, especially on projects with, high labor influx, such as infrastructure projects, we really hope that the ADB will take a child-sensitive approach to updating its SEAH measures in its safeguarding review. This includes in policies governing grievance redress mechanisms, making SEAH measures accessible to children, and providing appropriate guidance to borrowers. So namely, the question is really around kind of how is the ADB planning to assess and subsequently include adequate and appropriate mitigation and response measures around child SEAH to better protect and respond to the needs of children. Thank you.
Thanks, Coco. Maybe we can respond to those two comments before we go ahead. I'll invite both Sam and Malika, maybe Sam on the broader issue of cooperation with other institutions, and then Malika specifically on issues related to the risk to children from SEAH. Thank you. Sam?
Well, thank you, Zainab, and thank you very much, Ursula and others, for the question. So on the experience of IDB and other MDBs, we did, in developing our near final, a good practice note, and actually we are very much on the crux of getting it approved, so it is quite close. We did look very extensively at our peers and what they had in place. And I guess of course, we still have to go through our own internal procedures and have something that's acceptable to our management and work through our own internal consultation and all that. But what we have in terms of our current near final draft good practice note is very much building on the experience of others. And so there is a lot of cross learning that's been there. And that's been really invaluable for us to come this far, and the MDB working group on SEAH is a very useful platform. So I think I guess Malika can probably talk to a bit more detail, but our approach is probably closest to the World Bank approach, but it is also drawing upon broad experience. And I think going forward amongst the MDBs, there's really that genuine intent to work closely together, particularly at country level, given that different MDBs will be coming in with their different requirements, and to make it easier basically for the partner and the client. Malika may want to speak to that in a bit more detail, but I also just wanted to talk to the collaboration with UN Women point. They are a very close partner of ours, and actually we renewed our MOU just recently, just a couple months ago. So we had a 5-year MOU, and we've just renewed it for another 5 years. And so within this renewed MOU, it's quite broad, but there are sort of 5 key buckets of areas of highlighted for deepening our collaboration. So I can just share those with you. The first one is around data, strengthening gender data and technical capacity for gender data, including around the SDGs. The second one is around gender responsive governance and tools for that. So in particular, working together to deepen gender responsive budgeting, as well as gender responsive procurement. The third is around women's entrepreneurship and supporting gender responsive economies and value chains. The fourth one is actually around eliminating gender-based violence. We haven't specifically been working with UN Women very much on SEAH in particular, but we do work very closely on the broader topic of gender-based violence. And an example of that is we're currently working with UN Women in the Pacific on their large violence program to develop a regional violence against women hub. And lastly, which is also, I know that in the comment earlier, there was a reference, an earlier comment, reference to the CSW recent agreed conclusions. So that relates to our fifth area of agreed collaboration with UN Women around advancing knowledge and evidence on gender and climate change. So those are just sort of at very high level what our MOU says. But we do interact on it very closely with UN Women. And maybe just one other example of that is we've been working on rolling out rapid gender assessments from COVID, rapid COVID gender assessments. And we're about to go into a series of a few joint launches over the next few weeks in a few countries, as well as a regional report. So maybe I'll stop there, and we're getting a bit away from the SEAH topic, but just wanted to share that. And Malika can maybe bring us back to focus on the issue of children in the context of SEAH and how we're approaching that. Over to you, Malika.
Yes, thank you, Sam. The current draft of the good practice note, which we're finalizing, specifically refers to children in several parts. It starts with explaining and with the part where we're explaining the scope of the good practice note and understanding the risks for SEAH. And there are several parts that are talking about the children and adults at risk and intersectionalities, as well as understanding informed consent, which specifically says that children and persons with cognitive disabilities, for example, may be unable to provide informed consent as an adult. There are also provisions that are specifically related to children in the template for code of conduct, which is provided as part of the good practice note, and provisions on case handling and responding, requiring, for example, that any disclosure decisions have to be done keeping in mind the best interest of child. We are at early stage in terms of understanding how this can be incorporated in the good practice note, and we are, as Sam mentioned, we are very closely kind of following what other MDBs are doing. We also know that World Bank now is also in the process of reviewing the current good practice note to pay more specific attention to children in the document, and also developing two other good practice notes, which is specifically addressing issues of SEAH in the context of operations in education sector and in health, where risks for children may be higher. So we will continue working and developing the approaches, but as of now, we're including the risks that are, for example, in the risk assessment tool, we have factors that related to children presence. If, for example, the project area and where we will having camps for workers will be close to schools, in vicinity of schools, or where kids will be going, from home to school, this would automatically increase the risk categorization for the project and would require specific measures to be included in the project designs, both in terms of the provisions and contractors, but also in the grievance redress mechanism and reporting. Thank you.
Thanks, Malika. I'll now call on Elana Berger.
Thanks, Zainab. Hopefully everybody can hear me now. Thanks so much for hosting this consultation. I think it's great that there's a specific consultation on SEAH related issues, and really appreciate how seriously the ADB is taking this issue. I have a few comments and questions, but my first one is on this good practice note. I've heard this good practice note referenced several dozen times, I think, but we haven't seen it. It wasn't shared as part of the materials for this consultation, and I wasn't able to find it on ADB's website. So I guess I'm a little concerned or wondering about how there will be consultations and engagement with civil society around this good practice note. I know that you referenced that it is something that is being worked on and that you hope to have approved by the board shortly. You reference a great deal the standard of the World Bank, and I will say that with the World Bank, we have had a great deal of engagement with them around the relevant good practice notes and guidance notes related to SEAH. So I would hope that that is something that we'll be able to see and comment on and discuss, particularly because the extensive set of consultations that are being held by the ADB as part of this safeguards policy review and update is something that is really unprecedented and something that we as BIC and civil society broadly have been holding up as a model for exactly what a bank should be doing in terms of consultations with civil society. So I hope that applies to something as important as this good practice note. In terms of some of my specifics, I hear that Malika, you referenced a code of conduct on children, that the code of conduct would address children. But one thing that I note is that the summary of the document on SEAH that was shared with us as part of this consultation really doesn't talk much about the procurement side. There's many references to what other institutions are doing on procurement, but only one reference to sort of how the ADB might think about incorporating that, and that's around sort of risk assessments. And we think that procurement should be very central to what the ADB is doing on SEAH, because in many cases, it's the influx of labor and thus the contractors that are committing the abuses. And the World Bank's creation of a contractor disqualification mechanism for failure to follow SEAH policies is really unprecedented and is really something we see as a strong step that we'd hope the ADB would consider doing as well. Additionally, we think that there is a real need to break down the SEAH guidance by different types of projects and by different groups who are at risk. So I know that Coco, my colleague, referenced children, but obviously sexual and gender minorities are at particular risk, and that we also have persons with disabilities, indigenous communities at risk. And I do appreciate that ADB has mentioned that, in the study that this is likely to be something cross-cutting. So, we'd like to see it addressed in, for example, an Indigenous peoples policy where you're looking at SEAH risks that are specific to Indigenous peoples. So maybe I will stop there and interested in thoughts and really want to see that good practice note, because I think that is going to be very relevant to understanding the direction the ADB is going on this issue.
Thanks, Ilana. Very good points. Can we go to Malika maybe, or Sam? Do you have any reactions?
I think Malika can probably take this first, and I can supplement as required.
Okay.
Yes.
Malika.
Thank you. Thank you, Ilana. Ilana raised very important questions, and this was part of our work with our procurement colleagues to see how we can incorporate procurement related provisions in the good practice note to ensure that this will be implemented, given the fact that currently we don't have specific provisions in our policy. So from this perspective, ensuring that procurement requirements are central to enforcing this agenda in our work with the executive and implementing agencies is very well noted. So in the current good practice note, there is a whole section that discusses how SEAH-related provisions have to be incorporated in the procurement process, starting with the standard bidding templates and requirements for bidders, and what type of documents they have to provide as a part of their bidding document. We also provide minimum good practice standards as a template document that can help bidders do the self-assessment to identify the key gaps, and then also to develop a budgeted plan that will help them to be in line with the requirements of the good practice note, with the recommendations of the good practice note. The good practice notes also have a very strong reference to the budget, because we do understand that unless sufficient resources are provided to support activities that will be identified as the gaps that needs to be filled during the first year and then later, unless we have these provisions included in the contract, it will be very difficult to ensure that it will be implemented. One of the requirements, in addition to the code of conduct that I've been talking about, one of the requirements is also that all bidders will have to provide a declaration on contractual issues and response to previous SEAH concerns. We are not the first bank that been working in this area and pushing this agenda in the DMCs. So as part of the invitation to bid, bidders will be asked to submit this declaration, which will be clearly stating if they had any contract that was terminated, suspended, or there was a performance, security code for the reasons related to the poor performance on SEAH. This will also trigger another mechanism. So if later we find out that declaration of contractors fails, then this will trigger our integrity principles and guidelines. The requirements will be in place, but it also means that we have to ensure that our executive and implementing agencies who will be preparing bidding documents, are fully on board. And this would also require a lot of capacity building and guiding, which during the pilot stage will be supported through consultants in 5 selected countries. So we want to try out and to see how this will be work, but we also continue our work with our procurement colleagues and see how we can further strengthen the requirements through the provisions on SEAH in the standard bidding documents and the contract templates. Thank you.
Thanks, Malika. Sam, do you want to add anything?
Okay, thank you. I think Malika covered most, but maybe just to clarify, Alana, on your question about the good practice note and its status and all that kind of thing. So first of all, it's something that will be approved by our management, not the board. So it's not yet approved, but when it is approved, it will become public. But this is for the purpose of the pilot. So I think we need to make that clear. At the moment, in the absence of having a policy per se, it's going to be piloted, and it will be piloted in a quite a defined scale. And that the intent of that is to use that period to learn, to trial it out, and then by the time it does become policy, that will be the period when it can become a sort of more final form. So in that stage, there will be learning that can be acquired, and there can be further consultation with our developing member countries and others, so that by the time it does become policy, it would be a better fine-tuned document. Of course, we don't know for sure yet whether it's going to become part of the safeguards policy, but that is the direction we're heading in, and that's what we think is likely, and it probably makes most sense. So I hope that clarifies where we're at. But yeah, it definitely will be made available at the time when we start sort of piloting. So I hope that helps clarify. I don't know, if you want to add anything to that, or
Alana?
Yeah, I just wanted some clarity on why it's not being shared in draft form for input.
Sam, do you want to answer that?
Well, it hasn't even been approved internally yet. So I guess until we approve it internally, we can't go to that next stage. What our intent is in terms of our approach is to basically have a two-step approval. And so the first is around approving it with our management as an approach, after which we will do in-depth consultation, further consultation, and through that period, that's when we will also be confirming where we're going to pilot. We haven't even determined which countries we will be piloting in yet, because that needs to also be consulted. And so then there will be then after the second stage of approval will be when we start our pilot. And so all this will happen while the safeguard policy update process is also happening in parallel, because we don't want to wait until then to be able to actually start learning and rolling it out. So the idea is that the two will eventually come together, assuming that this is likely to be picked up by the safeguards policy update. And at that stage, obviously, there will still be a requirement for good practice guidance to underpin whatever is in the eventually in the safeguards high-level statement. And so at that stage, then that's when we could probably build in more of this kind of nature of consultation that you were referring to.
Thanks, Samantha. You actually also answered the other question that came up, which is, have you selected the countries? So you haven't.
No, we haven't.
Yeah.
No, we haven't.
Okay.
We have some thought around that, but that hasn't yet been confirmed. No. Sorry, I didn't see that question come in.
Yeah. Bruce, did you want to come in at this point?
Yeah, briefly, thanks, Zainab. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining again. Great to see colleagues from previous consultations. So let me pick up on a couple of things. So firstly, it is our intent at this stage to include, SEAH as part of the new safeguard policy. It's something that we've at an early stage discussed with the ADB board, sort of signaling the intent that that should be part of the policy. We still, of course, need to develop up the actual policy provisions. That's something that we're going to be doing over the next few months. In fact, we're coming to the end now of this regional consultation phase that we've been going through. We've still got a couple of topics to go, but we'll be going from that, reviewing further all of the inputs that we've received, and then getting more into the details of the drafting. Next steps will be a draft policy by about September or October this year, which we'll be making public. So that'll give us a chance to look at those details. I just wanted to touch though on the issue of guidance. So as Samantha has said, this draft guidance note that's being worked on SEAH through the gender team is happening sort of separately in advance of having the policy framework in the safeguards. And that is important because it's necessary for ADB to start getting experience and working with clients on that now. And there will be time to then go through the piloting and then do more consultations and have a sort of a final draft. But I just wanted to make clear our commitment that all of the guidance notes that will be prepared for the new safeguard policy will be made public, and we will get further inputs on those before they are made final. That will be a staged process as well. We'll be getting policy in place first. We'll be going to the board with the policy. We'll then have about 12 months, we anticipate at this stage at least, before the policy becomes effective. And during that period, we'll work on further guidance notes. We'll make those public and we'll do further consultations on that. So it will be a bit iterative, but you'll see, series of different documents coming out over that period. Thanks.
Thanks, Bruce. Can I call on Takako Morita, please? Takako, you had your hand up.
Might have been a mistake, actually. Takako is actually in our team, so she's working with us to help draft the policy. So she may be here and want to speak, but it may have just been a mistake.
Okay. And then I also saw Ursula. Do you want to come back on any issue?
Well, no, I just had the question, which will be the pilot countries, but that has been answered. So you are still kind of work in progress. And as I have heard, this is still all discussed in management, and it's not yet in a form to be really put forward to the board. So it's, and well, management first has to decide how to move on. and that means it's a rather early stage you are in, but I assume you will have a specific criteria on how to then select pilot countries, and I'm sure this is quite challenging because data issues, you mentioned that earlier, to get the data, and in this very sensitive area, I wonder really whether you will have some volunteers, but maybe you can't talk about that. It's too early, probably. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Ursula. Does anybody else have any? Oh, sorry, Samantha. Yeah.
Oh, no, I was just going to step in to say that while we don't yet have which of the pilot countries confirmed, it will be one per regional department. So you probably remember our regional departments. So yeah, it'll be one per regional department. And so some regional departments are more advanced than others in defining and determining or deciding which will be the pilot. But of course, this still needs to be agreed with the country. And that consultation needs to happen. But there are criteria in terms of selection around the pilot countries. And I can see Malika nodding, so maybe she wants to jump in. But they're around, having a sufficient pipeline, the large enough sort of forward programs that include civil works, so that enough that we can basically learn from them. But ultimately we want our regional departments to also own that decision, and that decision to also be done in consultation members. So there is indicative thinking. It's not like we have no idea, but obviously we can't say because we don't know for sure. Malika, do you want to elaborate a bit more?
Yes, just maybe to add that the selection criteria have been shared with the regional departments, and the initial consultations have been started. In addition to the criteria that Sam already mentioned, we have to have a large enough portfolio that would allow us to learn from the application of the tools, and the portfolio had to not just include the civil works, but it also had to be across different sectors, and also in different size, I would say, in terms of the project side. The two other criteria that I think will be important to mention is that we need to have strong buy-in from our country level counterparts. So executive and implementing agency with whom we will be working, they should be willing. At least there should be some level of understanding and willingness to participate in this pilot. We're also looking at, as you mentioned, the importance of available data. Although for the risk assessment tool, we are using some international report, to have an overview of prevalence of gender-based violence, child marriages, and all the data that can, help us to identify country-specific risks. And the third is, in the third factor, which is, I think, also important, that we also want to look at the service providers who are there right now, and what are the gaps in terms of the service provisions and how we can strengthen the system. Thank you.
Thanks, Malika. Any more questions? I don't see any additional hands up. Any more questions, comments on issues related to SEAH?
Maybe I could just ask one other question. How do you get really the huge group of consultants, international consultants, but also local consultants you have in place for the project implementation included into this very complex but extremely important exercise, let me name it like that.
Okay. Elana, I think you have your hand up.
Yeah, I don't want to monopolize the floor here, but if there's some time, I just wanted to raise one other issue, and that is that interested in thinking about how the systems are designed particularly around reporting. Because one of the things that we found in other institutions in our work is that, there is a fear of reporting cases of SEA in projects. And in particular, there's often a commitment to zero tolerance, which we certainly agree with, that there should be zero tolerance, but zero tolerance needs to mean an institutional commitment to implementing the correct measures to prevent and respond to SEA. It can't mean that anyone who reports cases, immediately faces consequences. And so, excuse me, I'm particularly interested in how, reporting mechanisms are being designed to make sure that reporting is encouraged rather than reporting being penalized and cases being hidden. Because our view is that these cases are happening, and they're happening at a wide scale. And so finding the cases actually means that the systems are improving, because it's set up in such a way as to identify problems so that they can be addressed and learned from. And so I'm particularly interested in that issue.
Thanks, Ilana. Can we go back to maybe Malika and Sam? Malika, do you have any insights into reporting systems?
Yes,
yeah.
Maybe I'll just start quickly to answer the question from Ursula in terms of how we're going to engage and find all consultants. So we are also currently, because when we had a discussion within the institution, how we can approach this, the first issue that was raised by our operations department was how we gonna, where the money will come from to build the capacity, where we're going, how we're going to engage consultants, how we're going to fill the gaps within institutions. So we are currently also processing the technical assistance, it's the corporate technical assistance, to support the pilot. So through this technical assistance, we will engage consultants on the country level. So the idea is that in each of these 5 developing member countries, we will have national consultants. We also have a team of international consultants who will be helping us with the complex projects where we will need the international consultant expertise. And this technical assistance will also be used to build capacity, raise awareness among stakeholders and executive and implementing agencies, because it seems from our operations team's perspective, the most important part of the work. We will be also developing several knowledge products that would help to operations team in designing the project. So, and this knowledge product will be related to the, country assessment on gender-based violence and sexual violence, some quality mapping of service providers, looking for opportunities to collaborate with other MDBs on the project level in terms of the capacity building of stakeholders, but also some joint activities in strengthening gaps in the service provisions. So the TA is still in the process of development, but money has been allocated for that. And I think that, now we're in the process of revision of the SPS, and it's clear that as an institution, we'll have to address the gaps in terms of, and this was one of the issues that was identified in the benchmarking study, we will have to address the issue of the gaps in the expertise and in terms of the number of staff who will be engaged in this work. So I hope I answered your question. And now the question from Ilana in terms of grievance redress mechanisms reporting, and maybe I'll just start with this key principles of zero tolerance. So we also had quite a long discussion on how we formulate the principle, because the saying as a principle zero tolerance to sexual harassment is a kind of tricky, because whatever measures we establish in the within the institution and at the project site, whatever provisions we have in place and most effective mechanisms, doesn't mean that the incident will not happen, right? So they might be happen. So this is why one of the principles that we included is the zero tolerance to inaction. So zero tolerance to inaction means that we will not stand the situation when contractors, for example, not reporting upward to the executive and implementing agencies if they're receiving the case. And we are also providing, as a part of this current good practice note, we are providing set of tools, including SEAH case handling risk assessment tool, the reporting tool, and the mechanism for reporting upward. We are in process of preparing another good practice note on grievance redress mechanism, case handling and reporting that is specifically designed to be used by executive and implementing agencies because they are the key players in these mechanisms. So the GRM and reporting system in both documents are basically talking about the three possibilities or three options for the reporting. So the one is similar to the World Bank. It could be standalone reporting, which is specifically tailored for SEAH cases. The second one is we can look at how we can tailor existing project reporting systems, but ensuring that we have staff trained, the confidentiality requirements will be followed. And the third one, we can look what are the existing systems in place by the country level that can be used. But the choice for these three reporting is it depends on the project risks. So the project risk is a key element to consider when we do when we have a decision-making process in terms of what types of reporting systems will be used. And then we are talking about like three levels of the reporting mechanism. So the first level is the community-based and the contractor-based grievance redress mechanism where reporting can come. The second level is executive and implementing agency. We need to have the door, like the window for the reporting in case if the cases are not handled properly on the lower level of the project implementation. And then we have the alternative reporting system directly to ADB if there is a conflict of interest, or again the risk that this was not handled properly, and this can be done through the whistleblowers or the survivors themselves. So we are working on it. We are developing this good practice, and we are working with a team of international consultants who've been supporting other multilateral development banks in setting up the systems, and not just in designing, but also in implementation and monitoring. And we hope that the pilot will also show us if these are effective approaches or we need to adjust and adapt basically based on the country-specific situation, because this is what we hear from many stakeholders who are saying, look, you have to consider what's going on the country level, and not just on the country level from the national level, but also project specific, because the project specific characteristics are probably the biggest triggers in terms of risk, mitigation risk, or increasing risk. Thank you.
Thanks, Malika. Ilana, did you want to come back? Or?
No, I just wanted to say thanks. I think I agree with pretty much everything that Malika said, and I think that it almost is going a step farther to not just avoid disincentivizing reporting, but really to create a culture where reporting and finding cases is actually seen as a positive, which I think is so tricky because by definition finding cases isn't positive. But I think there's that need to really sensitize folks that this is happening in your project. The only question is, do you find it and address it or not?
Okay. I see that we have a representative from Conservation International. Do you have any comment? Do you want to come in? Especially since you are the person responsible for gender and safeguards. Is there anything that you want to add, possibly?
Oh, thank you. Nothing in particular, but I'm really enjoying this conversation. As I shared in the previous consultation on gender, we've just recently finished our ESMF and have a gender policy and have integrated SEAH across the ESMF and are sort of at the same point of coming up with some guidance notes and explanations of how we might see SEAH appearing in conservation-related projects. A lot of the examples are from, development more broadly, and so we really find it important to come up with examples from our own sort of sphere. So yeah, nothing in particular, but thanks for the conversation.
Thank you. Charles, I see you also had a comment. You want to make it to the group on reporting?
Thanks. I'm just trying to get my video. Thank you, Zainab. No, I really, just as I commented, I thought Ilana's point is very good, because clearly the MDBs are showing real commitment to this agenda. And if you look at for example, the safeguard review summaries that the bank has been doing World Bank has been doing since the beginning, there's constant clear coverage of the SEAH issues. I think the challenge we have, and it probably goes to this issue of selecting on the pilots, is being sure that you have consistent commitment at the local and project level. And I know that is a challenge that all MDBs share, but I think a lot of work has been taking place to improve the communication with grievance mechanisms, including being sure that survivors' issues are understood and covered. But this is a relatively new area for MDBs, and I think the upwards trajectory of the concern and dealing with this is something all share. So just wanted to agree on those points. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Charles. Thank you very much. I think we have about 10 minutes left, but before I do a final call for any additional comments, I just want to speak about one experience also from the World Bank, because it relates to the issue of finding enough resources to do certain activities. And I recall for one complaint that had come from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the issue was finding enough service providers. And what happened was then that particular project decided to cooperate with another project that was working on local service providers, especially in the area of health. And that cooperation led to the availability of much greater resources of identifying service providers that could be used for the original project where the complaints came. So I think there are ways and means of trying to sort of cooperate among projects, trying to find resources here and there where resources are scarce. But I think this essentially means that everybody has to be convinced that SEAH is really a cross-cutting issue and is not something that is related to one particular sector or one particular project. Okay, so those were my 2 cents there. Any more comments, questions before we wrap up? Okay, I don't see any. I'll just remind everybody that questions and comments can still be sent after this session, and I'm sure we will be available to respond to them if you need more time to maybe ponder some of those questions. Otherwise, I'll hand back over to Azim.
Thank you, Zainab. And thanks also for the prompt on inviting further comments from stakeholders and participants to be sent by email. The email address is the same, and we can put it out on the chat box again. And thanks also to all of the presenters, Samantha, and respondents, of course, Samantha Hung, Malika, Bruce Dunn, as well as others from the EMT, as well as SCP teams, and of course to you, Zainab. But of course, a warm and heartfelt thanks and a special big thanks to you, our participants and informants, for raising your insightful comments, the clarity of your questions, the sharing of your experiences, and the constructive feedback in the way that we maintain the collegial atmosphere. I want to reiterate that the comments on this study as well as previous studies that we've had and consulted on, will be considered in the final study report being prepared by the ADB. These in turn will inform the revision of ADB standard and updating of the safeguards policy statement. Please don't go just yet. On your screen, you'll remember that we've asked for your feedback, and this feedback question is quite simple and hopefully quite quick for you as well. Please rate your level of satisfaction with today's session, ranging on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being the lowest and 5 being the highest. How satisfied were you with today's session and our level of engagement, the discourse, the quality of consultation, the level of the presentations, and the information that you've gained that perhaps you may have not had prior to this session? Please quickly rank this session on a scale of 1 to 5, and we'd like to feed that back to you quickly, let's say in the next 90 seconds or so. And then just a reminder that we've got 2 links in the chat box now. You will have seen them previously. One is on the menti.com. And if you want to break down your thinking on why you scored what you did in today's session, anything between a 1 and a 5, we'd be very, very happy and eager to hear from you on how these consultations can be better improved so that we can have more levels, more engagement, more participation, and just a more robust level of conversation. If there are specific ideas that you have, please share them with us. Even though this was our 15th consultation theme, we have a few more remaining, and there is an opportunity for us to alter and improve the way we consult to maximize your engagement and your feedback and the way that you shape these particular events. So we really want to hear from you. The final survey that we have is a post-event evaluation survey, and that measures what you thought you were going to experience before you went into this consultation and what came out as a result of your participating in this consultation. So we want to know if we matched, exceeded, or perhaps otherwise the expectations were somewhat different than you had envisaged. We want to know how and why we can improve those in the remaining few consultations. So with that, let me ask for the results of our Zoom poll before we move on to a final wrap up by Director Bruce Dunn, who will provide us a summary and indicative next steps. So we see that about 88% are either highly satisfied or somewhat satisfied. Interestingly, we didn't get any neutral responses, but we have 13% reporting that they were somewhat dissatisfied. All of those responses are extremely useful and valid for us, and we'd like to reflect on them. If you'd like to break down the way that you ranked this particular consultation and tell us what we can do better, we'd be very happy to consider those going forward and improve the way that we consult with you and other stakeholders. Thank you all once again for participating in this particular consultation, and I'd now like to bring you back to Bruce Dunn of SDCC to give us a summary of what we've heard from you and walk us through the next steps after this consultation. Bruce, if you please.
Great, thank you very much, Azim, and thanks again to everyone for joining. I really appreciated it actually to hear your views and your recommendations. In fact, we've now had the last couple of days of consultations on SEAH, and it's been extremely valuable. And I mean, personally, I've been learning a lot, and I think it's very valuable for our team. SEAH, of course, is a very important issue. It's one that we're committed to. It's, of course, cross-cutting issue, and we are expecting this to be included in the new safeguard policy and integrated across the safeguards in various ways. Let me just very briefly try and recap on some of the key points that we've heard, but of course we will be going through the details to make a fuller summary. Firstly, in terms of the guidance, now we have spoken about the development of the draft guidance note on SEAH that the Gender Equality Thematic Group has been working on. And we've certainly heard and taken note of the recommendation that we should make that public and do further consultations on that process, ideally before the piloting phase. So that's very well noted and something that we can take back and have some further discussions on. Also, as a recommendation that, of course, we don't need to reinvent everything here. Of course, we need to continuously learn and improve, but there is experience and guidance available from others. We've heard about the Inter-American Development Bank, the World Bank, also recommendations to build on work being done by UN Women and others. So that's very well noted. We've been looking at some of that already, and we will continue to. Next, in terms of SEAH issues, of course, it applies to adults, but also children, and a range of cross-cutting issues and intersectionality issues. For example, issues with people with disabilities. So these aspects will need to be incorporated appropriately into policy guidance and then implementation. There were also some specific issues raised in relation to risk to children and the need for child-specific focus and measures, including within grievance redress mechanisms. So that's also well noted. Appreciated also inputs coming on those points from BIC, which is included also in the statements that you've made on your website and shared with us earlier. Another important topic was on procurement. That sort of led to a pretty robust discussion on that issue, and that's an area that, as you've heard from the gender team and the guidance, they are looking at having specific provisions in relation to procurement. But across the board, actually, for the whole safeguard policy update, there is a lot that we need to be doing to strengthen the procurement process. So that's, SEAH is one aspect that we will need to bring into that process. Another important issue was on reporting, and I think we were very well aligned in terms of some of the approach and the thinking. Obviously, we need to have an institutional commitment and to address and seek to prevent SEAH issues from occurring in projects, but we need to make sure that we encourage a culture of reporting. And I think, as you've heard the team from our side say, that it's really we would have zero tolerance for non-action and non-reporting. But of course, incidents, should they occur, it's being able to follow up on them appropriately. Another important topic was on building capacity, and this, of course, will remain an important and challenging issue moving forward. But of course, we need to bring in expertise. We are looking at additional staffing in ADB, but there will be a need for consulting expertise, also partnerships, including with civil society, and we'll have to build that capacity very closely with our executing and implementing agencies, and communications campaigns and training of trainers and constant support and follow-up will be necessary there. And then one particular issue that was just raised towards the end was around service providers. The challenge with finding appropriate providers, particularly in some countries, there's work that we'll be doing around mapping them, but cooperation with service providers and the opportunities to strengthen their work through partnerships and financial support will be important as well. So that was just a few of the key points that were raised. Apologies if there's anything I've missed in this short summary, but we will go back to the notes again. And of course, if there are any further recommendations that you would have coming out of this consultation, always happy to have those in terms of follow-up. I think with all of us here in this small group, we've also got contacts via email. So, please feel free to follow up with us, and we can always have follow-up consultations on further details. So look, thanks very much again for joining. We'll be having some further opportunities to consult with you. Just as a quick announcement, next week, on the 6th and 7th of June, we will be doing some further consultations on the topic of sexual orientation and gender identity. Of course, that's another intersectionality aspect that links to the SEAH topic, but is also broader. So we'll be talking about that next week. And then the following week, we'll be looking at the safeguards for different financing modalities. And then the week after that, there'll be some special sessions on private sector. That will then conclude the consultations in this regional component. But in addition to that, we will have some follow-up activities. We're planning on missions and consultations with, at this stage, 10 of our developing member countries. And in each of those countries, we'll also have local civil society consultations. And then there's a special component that has just kicked off. Actually, we're now starting some consultations with project affected people. We've identified 10 projects that will actually be going out and doing focus groups with local communities to get their feedback. So we are trying to take a comprehensive approach, learn from a range of different stakeholders and experiences. So yeah, we're making progress, but still a lot to do before we get the draft policy out in around September, October this year. So thank you again for your partnership to make this process a success, and we'll look forward to catching up with you in future consultations. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.